Tragedy doesn't always have a single cause. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was a distance misjudged. Maybe it was the absence of bear spray. Or maybe the bear had already decided Richard White's fate long before he ever raised his. Camerati came to Denali in search of stillness, chasing one perfect image. But deep in the Alaskan backcountry, something was already watching. And within minutes, the peace he sought shattered into a violent blur of teeth, claws, and silence. This is the harrowing final story of wildlife photographer Richard White, a man who loved the wild and died alone in it. Welcome to Animal Quest. If you care about wildlife, survival, and real-life encounters on the edge, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, come with us into the heart of Denali. Richard White was 49, quiet, thoughtful, a man who felt most alive with a camera around his neck and wilderness under his boots. Based in San Diego, Richard had spent years wandering the American Western, alone, always on foot, always intentional. He wasn't chasing thrills or likes. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. For Richard, nature was meditation. It was humility. A place to feel small, to listen closely, and to capture moments most people never even noticed. Friends described him as meticulous. He planned every trip, with care tracking weather, migration patterns, animal behavior. He didn't just take photos, he studied the wild. He respected it, and he believed that if you gave that respect, the wild would give it back. He had explored Yellowstone, Glacier, and the Sierra Nevadas, but in August 2012, Richard set his sights on something even more remote: Denali National Park, Alaska, a place where nature reigns untamed, unforgiving, and unbelievably vast. Denali is no ordinary destination. It sprawls across over 6 million acres, bigger than Massachusetts. Snow-capped peaks, dense forest, wide rivers, and somewhere within it all, over 300 wild grizzly bears. It is breathtaking, but it makes no promises. Still, Richard didn't come for adrenaline. He came for quiet. No gun, no partner, no unnecessary gear. Just a backpack, a tent, a camera, and a notebook. In that notebook, later recovered by park rangers, he'd written one haunting line: "Hope to capture something true." But Richard didn't know that something out there had already found him, and it wasn't going to wait. August 19th, 2012. The gravel road winding into Denali was still. Dust kicked up behind the morning shuttle as it ventured deeper into the wild. Richard sat quietly, camera bag beside him, a folded map on his lap. He had just completed the mandatory backcountry safety briefing at the visitor center. Rangers went over the basics: bear behavior, safe distances, food storage, precautionary gear. But there are no guarantees in Denali. And as Richard disappeared into the vast backcountry, he did so with confidence, curiosity, and a quiet reverence for what lay ahead. He didn't know those moments would be among his last: proper food storage, campsite spacing, wildlife precautions. During the safety briefing, rangers stressed one rule above all: keep your distance from bears and always carry bear spray. Richard nodded. He listened. He signed the forms, but he didn't bring the spray. Whether it was forgotten, dismissed, or simply left behind, no one knows. What we do know is that when Richard stepped off the shuttle near the Toklat River crossing, he entered the wilderness with no real means of defense. He was assigned to Unit 10, a vast, open stretch of land near the river, known for its raw beauty and frequent bear activity. Few hikers chose this area. It was remote, exposed, and unpredictable. But for Richard, that was the appeal. He wasn't just after beautiful landscape sea, was after presence. That unfiltered energy of wild spaces untouched by humans. With his permit in hand and his backpack secured, Richard crossed into the bush. No cell reception, no radio, no GPS beacon, just a camera, a tent, a notebook, and miles of rugged silence in every direction. Over the next few days, he ventured deeper into the unit, camping in quiet, elevated places and journaling along the way. His notes, recovered later, held no signs of fear or danger. Sketches of ridgelines, bird calls, weather patterns. But what Richard didn't know, what he could never see, was that in those same valleys, a large adult male grizzly bear was also moving, feeding, wandering, roaming through the same terrain, and in a place with no roads, no crowds, no noise. The rules were different. This bear had no reason to avoid people, no reason to retreat. There were no trail cameras, no other hikers, but from the tracks in the dirt, the bent brush, and the layout of Richard's final campsite, investigators concluded that the meeting was unplanned, a chance crossing of paths, a deadly intersection. No stalking, no warning signs, no growls, just the sudden, explosive power of a wild animal asserting its space. Richard was alone, and whatever sounds filled that valley in those final moments, they vanished, consumed by the silence of Denali. August 24th, 2012. Late afternoon, the air hung still over the Toklat River. The only sound, the faint whisper of wind brushing through low willows. Richard had been hiking for hours, deep into Unit 10, far beyond the reach of any marked trail. Then, just around a bend in the gravel bar, he saw it, about 50 yards ahead. Standing at the river's edge, an adult male grizzly. Its fur shimmered, damp from the water, as if it had just emerged from a crossing or a muddy wallow. Massive, easily over 500 pounds. It hadn't noticed Richard. Not yet. And Richard, he didn't retreat. He didn't call for help. He didn't shout, wave, or reach for protection. Instead, he did what he had come here to do. He set down his pack, slowly raised his camera, adjusted the lens, and began to shoot. Frame after frame, the bear, unaware, moved along the stones, snout down, grazing in the shrubs. It didn't charge. Not then. It didn't growl. There was no warning charge. For a moment, the encounter felt almost peaceful. 8 minutes passed. The photos recovered from Richard's camera would later confirm it. For 8 steady, focused minutes, he observed the bear, patient, calm, quietly framing the shot. But then, something shifted. The bear stopped grazing. It lifted its head. The next photos were blurred. The framing became erratic. The angle tilted, as if Richard had stood up suddenly or stepped back. Then nothing. The shutter stopped. No more images. The camera would later be found, partially buried in moss and dirt. Its final image frozen in time. A close-up blur of brown fur, sky, and gravel. What happened in the seconds that followed can only be pieced together from the ground. The bear had closed. The distance, whether it was curiosity, a sudden perceived threat, or sheer instinct, we'll never know for sure. But what we do know is this: the grizzly charged, and out there, in that wide, exposed backcountry of Denali, with no barriers, no bear spray, no escape, Richard White was overtaken. There were no screams recorded, no final message, only the wind, the rush of brush underfoot, the quiet murmur of the Toklat River. And then silence. August 25th, 2012. Morning. The Alaskan sun crept over the mountains, casting long golden shadows across the Toklat River Valley. At the Denali Visitor Center, a ranger checked the permit log. One name stood out: Richard White. Unit 10, overdue. At first, no one panicked. Delays in the backcountry are common. Batteries die. Weather shifts. But as the hours passed, the unease grew. No one had seen him. No one had heard from him, and Unit 10 had recently shown signs of increased bear activity. By late afternoon, a search team was dispatched by air. They scanned the riverbeds and gravel bars from above, following faint trails where human footprints sometimes mixed with paw prints. Then Nat for 37. P.M. They saw it. A backpack, standing upright beside a patch of flattened tundra. A pair of boots, oddly spaced and abandoned, and just beyond, a partially buried human body. Rangers sealed off the area. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. This was a kill zone. A helicopter hovered low as rangers moved in on foot, rifles at the ready. They didn't speak. The signs were fresh, the smell in the air unmistakable. The camera was there, the journal was there, but Richard was gone. Denali offered no answers, only silence. Wind rippled across the tundra as the recovery team advanced carefully. Blood marked the earth in dark patches. Brush was crushed and clawed. Drag marks tore across the grass like wounds. This wasn't an accident. This was the raw reality of wilderness. No control, no negotiation, just instinct. Then, movement. Eyes from the chopper spotted something in the willows 200 yards north of the scene. The bear was back. Same size, same fur, same presence. It moved slowly, deliberately. No panic, no confusion, just calm, lethal certainty. And when it saw the helicopter, it didn't run. It stood tall, broad, and stared straight into the worry machine above, as if to say, "This is mine now." That one look told them everything. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity. This was the bear from the ground. Command was given. A ranger in the chopper leaned out, rifle in hand. He braced against the wind, took aim, and fired. One shot rang out. Across the valley, then another. The bear collapsed. No roar, no resistance. It simply fell right where it had stood moments before, sinking into the brush it had claimed just hours earlier. When the team reached its body, silence returned. But this time, it wasn't the tense stillness of a predator waiting. In shadow, it was the solemn hush that follows the end of violence. The bear was flown out for necropsy. What they found left, no doubt. Inside its stomach were unmistakable remains, shredded clothing, bits of Richard's backpack, pieces of tent fabric, a lens cap, and worse, human tissue, bone fragments. The evidence was undeniable. This hadn't been a bear startled into panic. This was predation. Richard White hadn't wandered into a tragic accident. He had encountered a grizzly that made a choice, a fatal, calculated decision, and for the first time in Denali's recorded history, a human life had ended this way alone in the wild, consumed, and buried by the very force of nature he had come to understand. It was the kind of ending no one wanted to believe was possible. But the photos told the story. Up until the last frame, the kill site told what came after, and the bear, now lifeless, on the tundra, carried the proof inside its body. Nothing could be undone, no. Footage could rewind what happened. The wilderness had spoken, and it had never promised. Mercy, what was once a place of serenity in Richard's ice, was now something else entirely. A valley marked not by beauty, but by silence and blood. In the days that followed the recovery of Richard White's body, Denali was quiet, but not the kind of quiet he had once cherished. This silence was heavier, filled with questions, regret, and the unspoken weight of an unthinkable truth. What went wrong? That question echoed through ranger stations, newsrooms, and homes across the country. How could a man so experienced, so prepared, so respectful of wildlife, become the first person in Denali's history to be killed by a bear? The answer wasn't simple. It never is in the wild. The photos on Richard's camera showed no panic, no threat display, no open jaws or raised claws. The bear appeared calm, grazing quietly along the Toklat River near mile 83, seemingly unaware, or maybe simply unbothered. But wildlife experts later said, appearances deceive. Bears don't always give warning signs. Posture can turn to aggression in a heartbeat. And most critically, the distance was wrong. Park rules require a minimum of 300 yards between visitors and bears. Richard had stood just over 50 to a bear. That's not respect. That's intrusion. Some believe he misjudged the space, others think he may have edged closer for a better shot. But either way, the outcome was the same. He was too close, and he was alone. No second voice to warn him. No second set of eyes, no one to distract the animal or call for help. He carried no bear spray, no deterrent, no margin for error. A veteran ranger who later reviewed the scene put it simply, Richard didn't make one fatal mistake, made several small ones, and out here, sometimes that's all it takes. At a press conference in Anchorage, Denali spokesperson Maureen McLaughlin stepped up to the podium, her voice steady, her face pale. Reporters leaned in. Cameras flashed, and then, for the first time in the park's history, she said the words no one had ever needed to say before. Leave space for a beat or dramatic pause. It was the first fatal bear attack in the park's history, she said. Her voice was steady, but the weight of the words hung in the room like fog, and it reminded all of us just how unforgiving the wild can be. No one knew what had triggered the bear's decision. Some believed it was territorial and instinct to protect. Others thought it might have been defensive, a reaction to a perceived threat. And some thought it was simply opportunity, a rare, tragic chance, a solitary human, unaware and unarmed. But the truth, whatever it was, remained, buried in the silence of that valley when the shutter stopped. Richard White wasn't being reckless. He wasn't acting carelessly. He was doing what he always did, trusting nature, and in a cruel, final twist, it was nature that turned on him. For Denali, a park built on the promise of untamed majesty, that day became a scar. A place once celebrated for its pristine solitude was now marked by loss. Richard had come in search of beauty, and he was taken by the very thing he came to honor. The camera was found by the riverbank, half buried beneath a collapsed tangle of willows near the Toklat River. The lens was cracked, the strap torn, but when rangers powered it on, they discovered the memory card had survived. And with it, so had the story of Richard's final hour. The first few frames showed the untouched valley, wide gravel beds, soft ridgelines, sunlight dancing through cottonwoods, then the bear, grazing calmly in the open. No raised head, no aggression, just a peaceful giant moving through the wild. Then a shift. The angle changed. The composition grew, rushed, unsteady, and the final image a smear of fur, gravel, and sky. The shutter had captured the moment before. Everything fell apart. Those photos became more than just evidence. They became testimonia, silent record of a story Richard never got the chance to finish. When word reached his family in San Diego, grief hit like a tidal wave. His daughter, just 19 at the time, said quietly, "I always feared this might happen." Not because her father was reckless, but because he believed too deeply in the goodness of the world. He believed that if he respected the wilderness, it would respect him back. That there was an unspoken understanding, whiten man and beast. But the truth is, the wilderness doesn't make promises. At a memorial in Anchorage weeks later, rangers who had recovered his body stood in silence. Richard's photos played across a screen behind them, not of bears, but of moments, clouds shifting over peaks, moss on stone, the paws of a red fox in morning light. They said Richard wasn't chasing danger or spectacle. He was chasing stillness, and messages poured in from photographers across the country. Some had never met him. Others had hiked beside him in Yosemite, Glacier, Sequoia. They called him quiet, thoughtful, intentional, brave. But amid all the praise, one phrase echoed louder than the rest. He died doing what he loved. His family repeated it in interviews. Friends posted it on tribute pages. Journalists printed it in headlines. But behind those words sat another truth more painful and far less poetic. He died because he was alone, because he got too close, because he didn't carry bear spray, because sometimes even love for the wild isn't enough to stop it from turning on you in the years that followed. Denali officials began using Richard White's story in their safety briefings for backcountry hikers. His final photographs, the ones taken just moments before the attacker, now shown as cautionary lessons. A stark reminder: grizzlies are not props. They're not characters in our stories. They are apex predators. One senior ranger, who flew the recovery mission, had his words added to the park's incident report. He said simply, "Richard's photos were beautiful, but no image is worth a life." And still, the hikers come. Photographers still wander off trails, chasing that perfect shot. But in the ranger logs, one name remains: Richard White, a ghost written into the margins of a place that doesn't forget. He came to Denali seeking stillness, but in the end, he became part of its silence. He came for peace, but something else was waiting in that stillness. Richard wasn't searching for conquest. He brought no threat, no fear, no weapon, only a lens, and a hope to witness something real. But the wild does not bend to intention. It doesn't care for experience or passion or poetry in the wild. Presence is permission, distance is safety, and every decision matters. Richard's camera didn't just capture beauty, it captured proximity, it captured a misjudgment, and it captured a predator who didn't need to growl to change everything. For anyone who steps into the wild to hike, to photograph, to simply observe, it isn't just a tragedy. It's a reminder: always carry bear spray, know your surroundings, respect the rules, and never mistake silence for safety. Because in Denali, silence speaks volumes, and Richard White's camarette still speaks louder than ever. Outro music fades in softly. If this story moved you, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing for more true wildlife encounter documentaries. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.